Let's see here. This next question comes from Luca. He says, I have a question for Steve Christie. If historical inaccuracy disproves canonicity, how does he explain the fact Luke seems to put census of Augustus during the wrong year of Christ's birth?
Yeah, Luca, that's actually a very good question, and actually, it's been proven historically that Luke did not make a historical mistake about that. I would actually recommend getting the John MacArthur Study Bible or Bible commentaries, because he discusses in great detail then that I don't have time to go into now. And another thing, too, is I think it was Sir Walter Ramsay or William Ramsay, I'm probably getting his name wrong. He actually stated that the evangelist Luke was the greatest of historians, that it turns out that Luke was proving the historians wrong, not the other way around. And that's kind of the point that I'm making. When you take a look at the books, 27 books of the New Testament, the 39 books of the Old Testament, there's not a single error or contradiction that's in there that cannot be reconcilable. Some are more difficult than others, but not like the point of Judith, which the New American Bible states is a historical book, not a book of allegory. And that's just one example. There are tons of errors that are in Judith, which is why they've been forced to say that it's a book of edification.
Okay, Trent?
Man, what I would say is that this is the absolute worst argument against the Deuterocanonical books of Scripture. Notice the attitude change, that when Steve looks at a proto-canonical book, when someone says it has an error, he'll bend over backwards to explain it no matter what, because he's already decided they're inspired and no allegation of error will change his mind. So if the Deuterocanonical books are just as inspired, we Catholics should be allowed to have the same attitude. You can't settle the question of errancy until you settle the question of inspiration first. What ends up happening is that Steve probably doesn't like it when atheists approach the Bible and they're just searching for contradictions, and they won't allow the text to be flexible to see the resolutions. And yet Steve and other Protestants adopt this very same mindset when they look at the Deuterocanonical books, because they've already decided beforehand they're not Scripture. Remember, we cannot settle the question of errors until we settle the question of inspiration first.
So let's get into. There's a few other things I wanted to cover, but like the main, besides Abel to Zechariah and that, I wanted to go over Trent Horn's inerrancy argument.
Yep.
And I had some thoughts about this, and then we'll also bring up in Judith the Hebrew name conflation thing. So I thought it was really interesting, and so what some of my viewers may remember is that. Trent Horn was basically saying you can't determine if a book has errors until you believe it's inspiration, which is really weird, because I think historically that's one of the criteria for whether you accept a book or not. You look at it, see, oh, this doesn't match what we already have, and then that's why I believe the Book of Sirach basically says, don't love your enemies.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to, this is exactly what happens in Mark chapter 7, where they have an oral law that they believe comes from God. And Jesus scolds them, but like, as Trent Horn shows, is that if you have two things you think are from God, Scripture and an oral tradition, or in this case, Apocrypha and the rest of Scripture, you're going to try to harmonize them, and that's a natural and good thing to do. You do want to harmonize stuff that can be harmonized, but if you try to harmonize oil and vinegar, you're going to, basically add an emulsifier, right? You're going to put something unnatural in to try to do it. So anyway, you could go on probably for minutes on this, but have at it.
Yeah, exactly. And this kind of builds into when you called in the Catholic Answers and talked with Tim Staples about Mark 7, and where Tim Staples erred, he thought that Jesus was just talking about man-made tradition. When he says the tradition of men, but he misses the whole point of the Korban.
Just to interrupt, my viewers may not know that, because James White responded to that so well. I didn't even cover it on my own channel. So continue.
Sure. And where Tim Staples errs is that what the Korban rule was this was an oral tradition that had been passed down that they believed came directly from God to Moses, and then passed down through the elders, the Old Testament elders, to the present day, to the Pharisees. So the traditions of men that Jesus is talking about are even those traditions that they believe that are holy, that come from sacred tradition, which is the same thing that the Catholic Church does, which is why they don't believe in sola scriptura. And Jesus is actually affirming sola scriptura here, right, because he says that that the ultimate authority and the only thing that has inspired
he's scolding them for not testing their tradition.
And they're supposed to do it against the Old Testament, which means Jesus is saying there is an Old Testament canon that we're supposed to compare even our sacred traditions to, and if they conflict, we're supposed to throw them out. But if we embrace them, then we're embracing the traditions of men, no matter how sacred they are.
Well, that's an important point you make, is that, according to Catholic apologists, like, we can't know what Scripture is, right, without the Church, or without them telling us, which doesn't work historically. And I think more astute Catholic, there's a difference between Catholic apologists and like Catholic academics and stuff like that. But when Jesus says, what you should be seeing in the New Testament is Jesus saying, hey, what you're doing it doesn't work with Scripture. And then the Pharisees saying, what are you talking about? What's the Scripture of which you speak?
Right.
It's like, it doesn't work.
When Trent said you can't know if something is inerrant unless you know it's inspired first, that threw me, because I'm like, well, how do you know it's inspired first? Well, he never said in so many words, but basically he's relying, on the Church. But if he's relying on the Church to define Scripture, and he's using Scripture to validate the Church, it's a circular argument.
Yeah, I pointed that out previously in a different video. That is a common thing where
and then he makes the accusation that Protestants believing that the Apocrypha is not Scripture. And I jumped on this and I says, no, Protestants don't do that. Protestants test every book, whether it's in the Protestant Bible or not. And then I gave, the examples: no errors and contradictions, written during a specific period of time, prophets and disciples of Christ who are miracle performing to validate that these works came from God. It's really the Catholic apologist who assumes that these apocryphal books are Scripture to begin with, and then they deal with the apparent errors because they believe, well, if it's Scripture, then it can't have errors. And Gary Machuda did this in his debate with James White as well. So it's actually the Catholic that makes the assumption first, not the Protestant.
I want to mention something that Trent Horn did in his post-debate thing with Gary Machuda, which I'll try to have links to all these videos in the description. Sure. Where it's like, oh, Judith could be history, and it might not be history. And it's like, you can't even tell me, like, and I do want to mention, like, they scolded you at some point for using the old Catholic encyclopedia from 1907. But one thing that encyclopedia is really good at is showing you what people felt at a particular point in time. Let me do a screen share again. Let me see if I can find this.
Which, by the way, they also use in the new Advent, the online encyclopedia as well.
Yeah.
They pick and choose what's valid and what's not, and what's current and what's not, too. So.
Let me, I use DuckDuckGo to hide, for a little privacy, extra privacy.
And while you're doing that, just for the benefit of your listeners, too, and whoever might be watching it, if it may not come up here, but under the historical books, it lists Tobit, Judith, the Book of Esther, which includes the Greek editions, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, as being historical books. So according to the New American Bible, which is a Catholic translation, the genre is not allegory, it's actual history.
Oh, so that gets me to this. One thing I want to mention is like, I'm really sure, but I haven't done the study, so I would like someone to confirm. Like, when these were canonized, what did the Church think? Okay, when people, or even back before they were canonized at the Council of Trent, like, did they actually view these as history, or did they view these as allegory? And I'm going to bet my bottom dollar they view these as actual history. So let's look at this. So this is from 1907. So this is from a more conservative time, even though they start to list some of the problems below as kind of like the minority viewpoint. Catholics, with very few exceptions, accept the Book of Judith as a narrative of facts, not as an allegory. Even John, I guess, that's a previous theologian, considers that the genealogy of Judith is inexplicable on the hypothesis that the story is a mere fiction. In other words, why are you? I'll stop the screen sharing now. So why would you be? Why would you have this long genealogy in Judith for an allegory?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense. And I think in general, like, to defend the Apocrypha, defending the Apocrypha is really about defending the church.
Right.
And to defend the church, they're willing to throw all of Scripture under the bus.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying Trent Horn specifically, but when I talk to Catholics, especially on the internet or so, most of them are willing to throw inerrancy under the bus in order to defend the Apocrypha, in order to defend the church.
Right.
So, who cares about? Then they'll start bringing up, oh, there's all these errors and all these other books. So, so that's a good. So I did want to mention the name conflation thing.
Yeah.
So the name conflation thing, it occurred to me last night. Usually occurs in rabbinic material, in kind of commentaries and midrash and stuff. It doesn't really occur, as far as I know. I'm not an expert in the field, in like just random allegory literature or history. Yeah. It seems to be more part of like more rabbinic theological writings. So if they want to get out of the Nebuchadnezzar thing, and I mean, it's possible that it was on purpose, but
and even that doesn't work, because what Jesus is doing with his name conflation, he's actually comparing one Zechariah, who is a prophet, with another Zechariah who's a prophet, who, although had different fathers, there are multiple similarities between them. But even as I brought up in my book, there is only, as far as Nebuchadnezzar being king of Babylon, yeah, there were other Nebuchadnezzars, but they were all king of Babylon. There's like 4 of them. And there is no Nebuchadnezzar who is a king of the Syrians, either inside of the Catholic Bible or outside of the Catholic Bible, even in secular history. So that's another reason.
Well, you could. I guess you could. I guess my problem is it's just the wrong genre. But and again, I would like to talk to someone like Christian Brady or something,
right?
Who translated the Targum, and I had private correspondence with, who confirms that he thinks the name conflation thing, he's not sure it happened in the Targum, but he doesn't think Jesus made an error. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But like, to me, like, you got more problems. So you can't pin down the genre of Judith. And if it's allegory, how do you, like, unless it's a short I can understand with a parable or something. How do you derive dogma from detailed history and allegory form, where it's like, I'm reading a fictional story. How do I like derive dogma or doctrine from fiction? It'd be like, here's the Lord of the Rings, like, be nice to people and they might help you destroy a ring later. I don't know.
I don't know. But I mean, even like what the whole genealogy thing, I think, was great, because we don't consider the Book of Chronicles, which has genealogies or the Book of Genesis, as being an allegory. We don't consider the Gospels of Matthew and Luke that has a genealogy of Jesus. Oh, that's just allegory or anything that's in it. There's too much dependency, I think, on someone like Origen. I notice Catholic apologists tend to take the position of Origen that he looked at a lot of the books as being allegory. Yet,
he used allegory on what he thought was history.
What he thought was history, right? So they're actually acting like Origen, which is actually kind of ironic, because Origen is not considered an early church father in the Catholic Church. So I just kind of
he's a very important theologian, and we shouldn't discount him like that, even though he had major problems. But
Right.
So are you acting like atheists when you find an error in the Apocrypha? Are you just doing the same thing? Like, and I saw this in the Post review. It's like, well, you got to be careful when you're talking to Mormons or Muslims and stuff. It's like, okay, no, the Jesus didn't come over and talk to Native Americans, but
No.
but like anyway. So please address that.
Yeah, what's kind of funny is when I actually have heard Trent Horn and other Catholic apologists, even on Catholic Answers, when they've said, well, how can we trust the New Testament? How can we trust, specifically the Old Testament? They are quick to point out, well, it doesn't have any errors or contradictions in it, and not apparent errors or contradictions, but actually no errors and contradictions. And they'll even agree with this even with the Hebrew Bible. But when it comes to the Apocrypha books that they embrace, they suddenly change their way of defending it. They'll actually go away from this and saying these are just apparent errors. And Trent had accused me of saying that I don't believe that there's any apparent errors, in the Hebrew Bible. What I actually said was that there are Bible difficulties, but they are Bible difficulties that on the surface, someone who has a surface understanding might not be able to reconcile them. But with careful study, some Bible difficulties are really easy to reconcile. Other ones require a little bit more work, but even those are reconcilable. And when he brought up that atheist Bible, that Mackenzie's, book of biblical errancy, in the post debate, because I asked him during the debate, can you give me even one example where there's a writing in the Hebrew Bible or in the New Testament that at the same level of an irreconcilable error as saying Judith, saying that Nebuchadnezzar ruled in Nineveh and was king of the Assyrians. In the post-debate interview, he used the example of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And that floored me because that's one of the easiest ones, because Genesis 1 is just talking about the 6th day of creation. Genesis 2 is talking about what happened specifically in the Garden of Eden.
Day 6. It was talking about day 6, and
yeah, it was talking about day 6 in the Garden of Eden, exactly. So so the order of events with animals and trees and everything, that's not a contradiction. That's easily reconcilable because it's talking about the 6th day creation as a whole, and then Genesis 2 is talking about, like you said, what's happened in the Garden of Eden in day 6. It's not a contradiction at the same level as saying Nebuchadnezzar ruled in Nineveh.
Now, we do want to be fair, and we do want to say, and I saw Machuda has a video coming up about like where wisdom says that God formed the universe out of formless matter instead of invisible, like in Hebrew. So I do want to be fair and use the same standards.
Right.
But at the same time, we're actually scrutinizing these texts, and so maybe everything that we see as an error or a potential error, we say, okay, I'll let you go here.
Right.
But where Sirach says, or maybe it was Tobit, I forget which one, where you shouldn't do good for your enemies, right?